building complex websites using WordPress. It's actually the second part of a talk that Clark gave earlier, so for you guys that were part of that, thanks for sticking around, and the guys that joined us, thanks for joining. Just a little bit about me. I'm Jason too. We actually have 3 Jasons in the office, so we all have really great nicknames. Mine is JMac. It's a nice abbreviation on a name, but also plays on my love for Apple products. So, I'm a production lead at VS Studio, which means I'm responsible for us getting our things done, but I can't really yell at anybody. I'm a Louisville native. Been a web developer since '99. That was a big party year for Prince. So, I've been with PHP since version 3. I'll stop the jokes now. Version 3, actually, Rasmus first released it as a extension for CGI libraries, so I'm actually more of a PHP developer than I am with WordPress, to be honest. I just started using WordPress probably since my time at VIA, because that's dominantly what we use as our development platform there, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'm a definite geek. I love Stack Overflow. I'm a very active member on there. I think it's a great community. And in fact, they have a WordPress community now in beta, so if you guys haven't taken a look at that on Stack Exchange, definitely go out and post your questions and become part of that community. I know the WordPress forum and codecs are great too, but these are just a little bit more active in my opinion. I do have a blog. I don't really post to it too often, and it's not in WordPress. And feel free to email me about really anything that you see in the topics here, or just WordPress in general if you don't feel it's, I guess, appropriate for a Stack Overflow question. So let's talk about the talk for a second. Just kind of where we're going to go with this. A very quick recap on the first part, just for the people that joined us, really just 2 or 3 minutes. From there, we're going to go into the WordPress strategy, the plan that we had to develop this site, actorstheater.org, and how we essentially, I guess, kind of our mantra, if you will. I've got a slide for the team mantra of how we developed it. We did use one plugin, and I'm going to talk about the design pattern of that plugin. We were very specific on how we wanted to build that, so that's probably as geeky as I'll get for this one. Theme development, really specifically for complex sites. Everybody knows of the thousands, literally thousands of themes that are out there in the WordPress community, but it's a little different when you develop a theme for a very specific site using a very specific set of data. So we're going to see that. We're also going to talk about branding WordPress. Specifically the customization of the WordPress admin. And if I get to it, a part that I really want to talk about, which is kind of a tangent, is setting up WordPress in a tiered environment. It's something that I've kind of researched and tried to tackle over the last few months, and I really haven't found that many elegant solutions out there, and I feel like ours is decent, so I wanted to share that. So
what do you mean by that?
What's that?
By a tiered environment.
I've got a slide. I'll get to it. I think we're going to get to it. So if it's okay, I'll keep going along here. So let's take a look at Actors Theater. I'm going to jump back and forth between slides and the demo here. So if you look at the site, this is the home page. You don't really see a traditional WordPress blog, right? It's a little more complex than that. You start to see things shine through with, you know, the what's on today over here in the corner. We have featured posts, which are basically news stories. But the things in the center, the show information, and although the content looks similar, it's just shown in a different format. We have very strong bits of navigation, which again shine through. And if you look through to the sub pages, again, you still see sections that, okay, are these posts? This is kind of dated information. What is that? You know, we have multiple bits of navigation, redundant navigation on the site. We have categorized navigation down here at the bottom. So, you know, how are we controlling all those things? You know, you start to think things like, you know, WP Nav if you're new to WordPress 3.0, or even just the list pages functions in the past. But having those pieces come together throughout a site like this, again, on the surface, you wouldn't immediately jump to, oh, it's a WordPress site. So, again, just some different formatted content. And finally, one of the detail pages. Not really your traditional post detail page, for example. So that's really the recap from part 1. Just to kind of give you an idea of looking at that site and just kind of seeing a little bit of the complexities, mainly from design perspective, but also, where's some of that content coming from? So we already knew that from the wireframes and the things that Clark talked about in the first part of this talk, kind of how those pages would look, even though we hadn't developed them yet. So what we wanted to do is say, okay, let's use WordPress, but what's our plan here? You know, we're a WordPress shop, so how can we build that with WordPress? And what we came up with was, this was kind of the mantra that I was talking about as a large-scale project. I think it's good as a team to kind of know what the centralized goal is, that underlining plan. And for us, that plan was, you know, native, using WordPress 3.0. It coincided very well to have that the release of WordPress 3 came out at the time that we first started this project. So we were really interested in using some of those native features and kind of pushing the boundary, if you will. When they released WordPress 3, it was kind of this shift that WordPress itself was maturing into a content management system, right? It wasn't, you know, just a traditional blog. They kind of introduced these new features, or reintroduced some features actually. So we kind of wanted to retrain ourselves to think in those terms, and like I said, really push the boundaries for ourselves and keep things native. And the word native really here is not even plugins, like strictly just WordPress out of the box. How can we configure it to build this site? And in the end, just to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, we came up with the whole site that we just kind of looked through, only using one custom plugin that we built, and we had 3 custom page templates. So inside of the custom theme that we built, of course. So, but not what you would expect, again, from the surface. So getting real deep into that, the WordPress strategy, again, WordPress itself gives us these general concepts of pages, posts, and links, right? But for Actor's site particularly, we also had these concepts of events, shows, and cast and crew members. So what were those? You know, we didn't really know right away. We just really wanted to identify them. We also knew that we could relate things together throughout the site and all those redundant bits of navigation that we saw with tags and categories. But they also had bits of data like sponsors and locations, position information for your cast and crew members. So how are those things going to come into play? They also had a very complex scheduling plugin. Complex scheduling. So the events and shows particularly, you know, they played at different times during the week at different hours on different days. So it wasn't as simple as like a movie theater that has a single show that shows up or shows at 7 p.m. every night, right? So really complex bit of information there. And then if you were, again, part of the first talk, it was very important to the client to have seasons. They didn't have that in the last site. There was really no way to look at last season and what played when, who was in it. No real archiving that was part of the site. So that was a very large requirement for this site, and something, again, that we knew it related data together, but we didn't really know how yet. And actually, point in fact, before we even started developing, just to kind of lend to this strategy, we actually had this exact slide built before we even started the project. So something like this can really help. And looking back, what we found now when I revisited this slide was that everything on the left was really the data, right? And everything on the right really became the relationships that bound that data together. So again, we had a very clear plan of how we wanted to pull everything apart. So let's take a little bit of a look at the data. So as we kind of like enrich the colors here, if you will, the grays are real general, right? So it's everything that we get for free with WordPress. But the blue areas, again, we weren't really sure how we wanted to do those. So we kind of started talking, I guess the developers started talking about, well, what is a show, right? So a show has a title and an excerpt and, let's see, I guess a summary for that show, as well as additional information. It has a unique ID that's part of that show. So it's Dracula 2010, for example. So when you start identifying those pieces, we kind of thought, well, what does that sound like? That's a post, right? I mean, it has a title, it has a GUID or a slug, it has an excerpt, and it has content. So looking at WordPress 3.0, and again, actually they were part of WordPress 2.9, but it was kind of a hush-hush operation. So custom post types fit perfectly for that. That foundation of data for really events, shows, and casts, all were custom post types in the end. And we're going to take a closer look at that, not only in the WordPress administration, but actually how to set those up in the code. We still weren't quite sure about the schedules, though. Again, they were really complex. So it wasn't as simple as just assigning a custom field to a show, for example, that said 7 p.m. and then we pulled that in the theme to display it. It wasn't like that. It was, you had one show on Tuesday, you had a different time on Thursday, you had 2 of them on Saturday, nothing on Sunday, and the next week was completely different. So due to the complexities of that, that was an area that we really had to build a plugin out. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and actually when you start using custom fields beyond a few, they really add up, and WordPress without some other performance considerations can really bog down. You'll hear that from people that build larger sites. Although the post meta is an excellent piece of architecture, it doesn't really scale that well if you think about it, because if you have 100 posts on your site and each post has 10 bits of data, well, now you just have 1,000 records that you just generated in a database table. And of course, MySQL can handle that, but it's one of those things when you're doing that on every page load and pulling it down and querying it does become a performance consideration. So breaking that out in a plugin where we manage those tables and we can optimize that and get at that data made sense. And we'll talk a little bit more about the architecture of that. So custom post types. Actually, the talk in here earlier, I'm not sure how many people were in that, but I might not go over this in as much detail. But to set up a custom post type, I guess it's bad color choice, sorry. To set up a custom post type, you essentially create the labels. And you can get very granular with this. You actually don't even have to set it, but you can get really granular. So, sorry about the colors again, but the name is events in this case. You can set the singular name, you can set the plural name, you can set the name that comes up when you delete one of them. So again, a lot of control over that. You also pass that in as a bit of arguments in addition to something like the rewrite rules, so you can control what it says in the URL. So in this case, events was lowercase events. There's a slew of other arguments. Essentially, when you set all of those, you register that. And this belongs in your functions PHP, and we'll take an exact look at the code here in a minute. But putting this in your functions PHP, you can register that post type. The first argument is the data name. And I definitely recommend that everybody use prefixes. If you read the WordPress, or I'm sorry, the codex on WordPress for custom post types, they really stress this, but it's one of those things that actually we didn't do at first. And what we found is, especially with things like generic names like event or description, when you start turning on other plugins or even things inside of WordPress, you'll actually get some data conflicts. So be very mindful about that first argument when doing anything custom to namespace. And for those that aren't familiar with namespacing, it's as simple as just prefixing, just like WordPress does with the database tables, prefix with your own custom name. So in our case, we chose ATL, which was Actors Theater Louisville. So let's look at that code. So again, we have functions PHP here, and let's just kind of zoom in a bit crazy on these guys here. So again, we have the registering. This is all in functions PHP. We set up a single function where we just essentially registered all of our custom post types. So all those blue boxes that we saw a minute ago, we have events, shows, and cast and crew. So that's the code. Very straightforward, actually, and the Codex provides excellent information. Codex, generally speaking, is a great resource. But very simple to set up. And what we got from that, again, from that diagram, was almost, I would say definitely more than half of the site. So, well, let's zoom out. I think I broke it. All right. So if we take a look, once you register a custom post type, you get the interface for free, actually. WordPress gives all of that to you. So we see over here in the dashboard, zooming and shoot again. So we see the events and shows, we see cast and crew, we see the ability to add cast and crew members, and all of those labels that we set earlier.